Welcome to another special report from Catholic Family News. I am Brian McCall, the editor-in-chief of Catholic Family News, and I'm delighted to have a new guest with us today, Mr. Jack Maxey, who's joining us to talk about a very timely topic. So welcome to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our show is going to be about a topic some of our viewers may have some information about, or a lot, or maybe none, because it's something that has been pretty ignored by the mainstream media. As reported last fall, a computer repair store discovered that they had a laptop that belonged to Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden is the son of Joe Biden, the man currently occupying the Oval Office. And this laptop sort of made its news around social media and sort of alternate media, pretty much ignored by the mainstream media. It was referenced in one of the presidential debates, but very obliquely and no real discussion of it. But Mr. Maxey has done a great job. He's obtained a copy of the hard drive from this laptop and has been analyzing it, studying it, and really going a great effort to make it the information available to the American public. So let's maybe begin for viewers who maybe this is the first time they're hearing about this story. Is there any doubt in your mind that this computer hard drive, this laptop, really belonged to Hunter Biden?
No doubt in my mind at all. I mean, for example, the metadata all matches up, and there's certain things in there that only Hunter could know. I mean, there are conversations that only Hunter could have with people. It's 100% true, and everybody who has looked at it has confirmed that.
So that's what he's referring to there is what, in a legal sense, I would call intrinsic evidence. So sort of looking at the thing itself, it's all consistent and supports it. So the metadata that underlies the different documents and texts, as well as you said, just sort of looking at it, only this person could know. There's also what I'd call extrinsic evidence. So we have the store where the laptop was brought for repair and then never picked up, has a receipt. We then have an email that's been produced where Hunter Biden's lawyer asks for the laptop back, which right. Not great lawyering in my opinion, but is sort of an admission. This is his laptop if I want it back. So absolutely right. I think this seems to clearly be from him, from all those sources. So then we say, okay, what's troubling about this? So what maybe you can characterize for us some of the things that are revealed about the Biden family in the data that's on this laptop.
Well, there's sort of two paths that one can take with a laptop. Certainly there is depraved drug behavior, sexual behavior. There's accusations that Hunter has abused one of his niece and possibly his nephew, that he's a danger to himself, a danger to the family. At one point, sister-in-law takes his gun away from him. There's multiple conversations inside the text messages between Hunter Biden and his father, who goes by the moniker Junior, in these conversations in which this is discussed. Hunter is mostly angry. It seems to me that his reputation is going to suffer. This really comes to a head, all of this, in the spring of 2019. Now he leaves the computer at the repair shop, I believe in late March, early April of 2019. But Maureen Dowd writes an article about Hunter in February of 2019. I think it's February 20th, 22nd, somewhere in there, saying that Hunter's going to be the great liability for his father's attempt at the White House. Hunter's quite upset about this. Hunter speaks to it with multiple members of his family, multiple others. That's one whole side. The idea that Hunter himself is an abusive drug addict and a danger to society. That is all quite apparent for anybody who reads through this. And notably, under Delaware law, if there are credible accusations of child abuse, every Delaware citizen is obliged under the law to report that to law enforcement. So the Biden family didn't do that. The Biden family that we know of did not do that. Mm-hmm. And that never occurred. Now, on the other side, and this is perhaps more frightening on a broader sense than the private depravity and certainly for the young people involved. They're in my prayers when it comes to the abuse allegations. But
Yes.
Hunter and his family also put the national security of this entire country at risk, meaning that we are all victims of this family. We are victims of the cover up. He was in a long-term relationship with the Communist Chinese. Starting in 2014, they began negotiating a private equity fund that Hunter and a fellow named Devin Archer and a third guy named Jimmy Bulger were all partners in, alongside the Communist Chinese. Now, shortly after his father's visit, where he was going to go dress down the communists for constructing these islands in the South China Sea. Remember, Joe Biden was the point man on China, and he was also the point man on Ukraine. And I don't think there's any irony or coincidence that both those countries end up becoming money pots for Hunter Biden, and therefore by extension for his father. So Hunter gets a $1.5 billion investment agreement with the Bank of China. This is the equivalent of the Communist Party's treasury. This is a deal that Goldman Sachs never got. This is a deal that JP Morgan never got. This is a deal that, none of the great private equity players on planet Earth ever got, or any of the alternatives. This was a unique situation in the history of China's foreign investment.
So when you say never got, again, now you're naming some, big names in American finance that are in private equity, and you say, and then we have this guy who's just starting out, right? No history, who's just trying to start up a fund. What do you mean by never got? And they never got any kind of
They never
investment?
got the Bank of China to invest $1.5 billion in any of their deals. They Chinese were tended to be very strict on what they invested in, and they usually made their own investments. So for them to set up this fund with Hunter and Devin Archer and Jimmy Bulger, and for your listeners, yes, that Bulger name is something you remember. He's the nephew of Whitey Bulger,
Yes,
one of the greatest criminals in the history of Boston, and at the heart of an FBI scandal in which several agents went to jail. One of them, I believe, was accused of participating in murders with Whitey Bulger. Until today, the first largest scandal in FBI history. I think now this is really the biggest one. So throughout,
so he got this sweet deal that established parties didn't get. And let's just backtrack a little bit. When you said he's doing this with the Chinese Communist Party, so what do we mean by that? Because some people might say, well, it's a big country, maybe it's just Chinese people who happen to live in a communist country. I mean, when you say that, what kind of level of leadership are you seeing evidence of him interacting within the Communist Party itself?
well, whatever the facts may be, Hunter certainly believed himself that he was dealing with the absolute highest echelon of Chinese espionage, Chinese intelligence, Chinese communist apparatus. For example, he makes a tape, and I'll be happy to share it with you, where he talks about my partner, the spy chief of China, has disappeared. Literally the richest man in the world, blah, 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 blah. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, they're calling my father, they're calling Eric Schwerin. So towards the end, Hunter makes this tape where he starts to lay out kind of what his danger is. And I think, as he often does, he may overstate the roles that some of these men had. I don't know that Patrick Ho was the head of Chinese intelligence, but he certainly was very high up the pecking order. So was his other partner, Jonathan Yi, who has disappeared. Nobody has seen Jonathan Yi since all of this started to break. So throughout this period of time, they were using this Bohai Harvest Company to purchase strategic assets inside the United States, inside the Western countries. And as I've said before, it looks pretty good when you've got the vice president's son on your elbow and you're trying to buy something with strategic purpose or national defense purposes. It's kind of like walking in there with Mother Teresa, or at least that's the impression it gives, right? This has all been vetted.
Yes.
Right. The vice president's son could not possibly be involved in something that wasn't clean. Well, he was involved in unclean things over and over again, from human trafficking, from selling information to the Chinese, from selling out American corporations, from taking vast amounts of money from Barisma in the Ukraine, from taking money from Moscow, taking money from Kazakhstan, taking money from some of the most awful people on planet Earth. For example, Patrick Ho, the one he describes as the spy chief of China, who he's a partner with in a company called Hudson West, which was an LLC that was based in New York City, the purpose of which was to purchase American natural gas assets for the communist Chinese, but using Hunter and his uncle Jim as the front men here in the United States. They would go to great lengths to put sometimes even third-party law firms in between their deal making. Unfortunately, for those who have done these crimes, Hunter, I believe, in the last year or so, makes a concerted effort to gather all the information incriminating, particularly his Uncle Jim, his Uncle Jim's wife. He records telephone calls with his sister-in-law, records telephone calls with his lawyer. We perceive it's his lawyer, with his therapist. Multiple times he tries to entrap people into saying things like this. For example, one of the documents that he saves is a $1 million retainer that Patrick Ho signs with Hunter so that Hunter can be the legal representative for the man Hunter, in his own voice, describes as the spy chief of China. This, to me, whether he is the spy chief or not, shows absolute intent on Hunter's part and knowledge on Hunter's part that he is engaging in espionage. Over and over again, you see these things. For example, Hunter claims and his father claims they never talk business. Well, in 2012, I think it is, 2011, 2012, Hunter hires a woman of Chinese extraction to work in his father's office at the vice president's annex right across from the White House. It's very clear that Hunter is in charge of her hiring. Well, as time goes by, this woman feeds Hunter all sorts of information, his dad's schedule, where he is, but it's always forwarding Hunter an email that Hunter wasn't necessarily supposed to get. One of them, for example, is the cell phone numbers of everyone from Hillary and Bill Clinton all the way down to the leaders of committees in the House. These are the private cell phone numbers. They're listed as private cell phone numbers. Hey, this is a secret list. She's sending this to Hunter. Wow. While at the same time, Hunter has what they describe as a communications specialist inside his office at Rosemont Seneca, broker-dealer that is in Washington, D.C., which was the kind of cover for much of their criminal activity, which, again, opens up a whole new can of worms. It's not just CIA. It's not just FBI who aren't doing their jobs. The SEC aren't doing their jobs. FINRA is not doing their job because they used a broker-dealer to launder many of these deals. So they hire a woman, mutually agreeable, and I'm not sure if she's a woman, mutually agreeable to Hunter, Rosemont Seneca, and their handlers in Beijing. This woman's purpose, or this person's purpose, was to become the new communications director for Bohai Harvest, Beijing, and Hunter. And the first thing they do with this woman is they send her to Beijing for a 3-week communications course. This is all in writing. He has saved all these emails. And what do you need a 3-week communications course for? Do you need that so that you can understand how to use Zoom or how to use emails? No, you do that so that she can understand how to covertly communicate with the Chinese so that she can pass on information. I mean, just a simple nugget would be the cell phone numbers of all the elected leaders of the United States of America.
Right.
And this goes on over and over and over again. They purchase an American company in Detroit that makes dampening systems for automobiles, tanks, jet engines. This has to pass CFIUS review, 2015. It has to pass, that means the Treasury, the Commerce Department, Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Defense, the whole 9 yards have to sign off on this.
Because it's a foreign investment in a strategically important defense asset. That's what you're referring to? Yes. Yes.
And they all signed off on it. Even the American media questioned this later. People can go look it up. And they tried to purchase several other companies in Europe, and our NATO allies turned them down. So all of this was occurring. Now, I think that should give everybody a highlight as to just how dangerous these people are in terms of their compromise. But what's really
well, let me ask you, based on what you said there. So why do you think somebody who's involved in these very shady, for lack of a more precise word, dealings, potentially criminal, why would they record all this evidence, record these conversations, kind of document their own crime? And what do you think was going on here?
I think that Hunter, when his Chinese partners started to disappear, because while our own intelligence services, there's no problem. Clearly, there was a problem in Beijing because they got rid of Jonathan Yi. They made Patrick Ho disappear for a year and a half. Now he's miraculously reappeared kind of in a chastened fashion like Jack Ma, 1 year in the guest house has made me a better communist.
Right.
So he's suddenly reappeared, but it seemed to me and it seemed to Hunter that there was a concerted effort to eliminate the Chinese partners, the people who could corroborate Hunter's crimes. And this just, this is this sort of thing that people who are in the defense establishment and people who I know and respect and people who raised me devoted their entire lives to make sure that this did not occur. And that this did occur is a huge black eye on our intelligence establishment. Now, it would be one thing if they admitted their error. It'd be one thing if they said, wow, this is going on. We can't believe this is going on. And remember, they got the laptop on December 9th of 2019. That date is very important because we were right in the midst of heading to an impeachment trial with a sitting president of the United States, and all of the information in there concerning the Ukraine and his dealings with Barisma, etc., would have completely thrown cold water on that entire case against the president on the first go around. But be that as it may, not only did they sit on exculpatory evidence in the midst of an impeachment trial, the most important trial that the United States can hold, the FBI sat on exculpatory evidence. But even worse, we headed into a Democratic primary where I don't think any thoughtful observer in January of 2020 thought that Joe Biden was going to be the leader at the end of the day. And who were betrayed there? You had Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar, you and all your supporters, all your donations, they were for naught because the FBI betrayed you. Elizabeth Warren, same thing. Bernie Sanders, same thing. Miss Giffords, same exact thing. You were betrayed by your intelligence services who had information that would have kept Joe Biden off of the ballot for dog catcher, let alone by Vice President of the United States. And they sat on it, and they're still sitting on it. This is now almost a year and a half later, and the FBI has still not commented on this. Now, on top of that, one extra piece of information that I think is very, very important, as we came into 2020, now remember the FBI had this thing since December 9th of the previous year. And I first saw the laptop or the contents of the laptop, a mirrored copy of the laptop, if you will, in mid-October. Now, apparently
mid-October of 2020.
2020.
Yes. Okay.
Apparently, Rudy's attorney had gotten a hold of it at the end of August, and I think he was trying to be extra diligent. He spent about a month going through it, and then I think they were just overwhelmed. They definitely were believed that it was real. I got a copy from them because Giuliani was a great friend of our show, War Room Pandemic, at the time, and they said, "Hey, why don't you just have my top researcher look through it?" And Brian, I can tell you, I found financial crimes in the first 20 minutes. I mean, it's broad, it's across the board, certainly crimes that would put a regular Wall Streeter in jail instantly.
And the FBI wouldn't need a year and a half to figure out if there was a crime.
Figure that out. And then there are also very disturbing pictures in there that are sent to Hunter from young people that aren't right. There are multiple videos that Hunter makes of himself performing, depraved acts and also using large amounts of cocaine. And all of this was acknowledged. Hunter had a Secret Service detail for the whole time that his father was the vice president. Hunter flew around with a Secret Service detail. Hunter at one time flies to Paris on Barisma's dime with a Secret Service detail, decides they're going to head on to Kazakhstan, or Kazakhstan. I always pronounce it incorrectly. People tell me. For meetings where they're trying to see if they can purchase natural gas assets inside Kazakhstan that also have this similar benefit of potentially benefiting the communist Chinese. They're going to build, their theory is to build a pipeline from the stand countries to China to bypass Russia on delivery of natural gas. You have to remember, at the time, this would have had to pass through Afghanistan, a war zone where American soldiers are dying every day, and Hunter's trying to cut a deal to leverage that so he can put a pipeline to the communist Chinese bypassing the Russians. Wow. I mean, the Russians should be as upset about this as anybody else. It is outrageous on every possible level. And the FBI had this on the 9th of December, 2019. So they allowed an American president to be impeached while being in full possession of exculpatory evidence. They allowed a Democratic primary to occur in which all of the other candidates, the Bernie bros out there, man, you guys should be in the streets. They betrayed you like you can't believe it. And in effect, they betrayed the American people, because our democratic process requires that the American people have knowledge so that they can make the most important decision that American voters can make, and that is to elect the president of the United States. Now, I started releasing some of this stuff in late October, mid-October. We got the New York Post wrote 2 stories about 2 of the emails. This is just scratching the surface.
And the first of those stories, for if our readers don't know, was pretty quickly eliminated on social media. Was the New York Post. Again, that's one of the oldest newspapers in New York, goes back to the founding of the country. The Twitter pulled the story and blocked it almost immediately.
Well, also the Fourth Estate fails us too, because my understanding is they went to the Daily Mail. My understanding is they went to Fox News. My understanding is the only reason it got published in the New York Post was because our producer, Vish Burra, a great guy, had a girlfriend there who was a reporter, and he sent it to her outside of the leadership, and she said, wow, I've got to publish this. And she went to her boss and said, hey, if you don't publish this, I'm out of here. We'll publish it somewhere else.
Wow.
And they did. But here's something key, Brian, that everyone has to understand. I believe those articles came out on like the 18th of October, 17th, 18th. On the 19th of October, 50 former leaders in the American Intelligence Committee. Now, I don't even know how you get 50 signatures in 24 hours.
Right? Yeah.
Unless you've already got a system in place to, play with the narrative. 24 hours later, there's a letter comes out. It's published in Politico. We, the undersigned, declare through our expertise that this is Russian disinformation. This comes out. It's signed by Brennan. It's signed by Clapper. It's signed by Leon Panetta. It's signed by Hayden, former head of NSA. So we've got DNI, CIA, NSA, and 46 other people who would be willing to essentially interfere in a U.S. election using the color of their government jobs or their prior experience defending this country and claiming their patriotism and claiming their expertise. So if you want to talk about election interference, that's it right there. That's when the New York Post stories got pulled. That's when everything that I had posted on our Twitter feed was declared fake news. We were taken down a few days later. This went into 2 weeks of absolute blackout on any news concerning Hunter Biden's laptop because it was Russian disinformation. This is an outright lie. And I think that the American people have to question, why would Clapper, why would Brennan, why would Hayden, why would Panetta, and 46 other people lie to the American people 2 weeks before the election unless they had an intent to influence the outcome of that election. And then you have to ask why.
And again, your point, in 24 hours, how do you get 50 people to not only get signatures, but to supposedly look at the evidence to reach a conclusion that it was, disinformation? So takes the FBI a year and a half. They're still studying it, but these guys in 24 hours can assess the evidence, make a conclusion, and get together and sign something. It defies reason that that's even possible.
It shows you an ugly nexus between American intelligence and media.
Yes.
Right? To think that American intelligence prior intel officers can come out, make a statement, and literally change the entire course of an election, change the entire media cycle, and change it towards a lie.
Yes.
This is not even just sort of, hey, we want everyone to have a different kind of perspective on this. This is an outright lie. And to, again, blame it on the boogeyman of Russia. Now, I'm an old Cold Warrior. And I never remembered the Democrats complaining about Russia during the 80s and the 70s. In fact, I always heard about how we've got to be friends with them, and how North Vietnam is a wonderful paradise, and it's the Americans who are evil. And now we come in, 20, 30 years after the fall of Soviet communism, and they're still running out this trope that our greatest existential threat is Russia. I mean, let's be real. The Russians have a hard time simply resupplying their bases that Obama gave them in Syria. Yeah. They don't have the ability to project power, but the communist Chinese do. And
yes.
We sit there, look with blinders on as if they never do anything wrong. And remember, during the impeachment, I think this is really key. Everybody can remember that fellow Peter Strzok, the one who looked like he was having he needed to go to anger management or something. He had the veins popping out of the side of his head, and there's multiple pictures running around where he looked almost as if he was possessed. He was so angry. He was the number 2 guy in Moscow. The Biden family is selling out literally the national security of this nation to the communist Chinese. People need to be held to task. The American people need to take back this country. And this has nothing to do with politics. This does not have to do with Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. This has to do with our national security, the safety from the smallest baby to the oldest person. And that is so important for everyone to understand. They should be angry, they should be upset, and they should be asking questions.
So maybe let's just may try pause there before we wrap up. And so you've sort of unveiled sort of 2 aspects of this. There's one, this Hunter Biden seems to have some serious personal issues in terms of drug abuse and potential criminal activity of sexual abuse. And then on the other hand, there's sort of financial ties and financial corruption, money laundering, et cetera. So what would you say to people who say, okay, that you're just, bring out all this information, but this is just a guy who's got a lot of personal problems. It's not really about politics. It's not, how can you say it's a national security threat that, this poor guy's got all these problems? How would you respond to someone like that?
Well, for example, you or I, with the drug background that Hunter Biden had, would never be allowed to ride on Air Force 2 or Air Force 1. We would not pass the security clearance to do that. And yet Hunter's flying to Beijing with his father. Hunter's flying to Mexico with his father. When he flies to Mexico, the purpose is to go in there and try and convince Pemex, a nationalized corporation in Mexico, to sell their assets. He flies down on his father's plane with him, spends the first day lunching with the president of Mexico, and the next day trying to convince Pemex that they should do business with him. I'd say that's a pretty good introduction, right? I flew down with the vice president. Now I'm coming over to see your nationalized industry, and you're supposed to cooperate, because yesterday's news cycle was pictures of me
with your president, right,
and playing with the president here. Yeah. This was done in Beijing. I mean, there's even a grift where they, working with the Chinese, tried to buy vast natural gas assets in Oman. There's a letter from the Chinese: "Dear Hunter, thank you so much. We could never even get this meeting if it was not for the influence of you and your family. Please tell your family that we appreciate everything that they do for us. They write this in 20, I think it's 2015 or 14. Mm-hmm. Hunter plans a trip to Beijing for Chairman Xi. It's called President Xi's trip to LA. They lay out what a successful trip will mean for Hunter and his partners in terms of cash flow. They're trying to use the Chairman Xi's visit to get into some technology companies in Southern California and then kind of gild the lilies so that they can get an easier chance of purchasing these companies. Hunter and Devon Archer are tasked with defining Chairman Xi's trip to the United States, defining where he's going to go, who he's going to visit. If that's not a FARA violation, and they define compensation, I don't know what is. I mean, this is something that should have been planned at the very highest levels of the State Department and the White House, and yet it's Hunter and Devon who are planning it.
And again, to make it, I think, clear to our viewers, I mean, if you have a person, again, occupying the levers of power in the White House who's making decisions that are supposed to be made in the national interest, but whose family has, direct financial interests, and not just small ones, right, in the hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, tied to a foreign government, what confidence can the American people have that those decisions are made in the interest of the American people and not personal wealth?
Well, here's proof that the American people should not have confidence that their interests are being taken care of. When Joe Biden went over to China, he was supposed to make sure that the sea lanes in the South China Sea were open. Part of his mandate was to make sure that they stopped building those fixed aircraft carriers in the middle of the sea there. He failed, but his son got $1.5 billion. Joe Biden was made the point man on Ukraine to deal with the Russian aggression in Crimea. Now, a significant portion of Barisma's gas assets are in Russian-occupied Crimea. The Russians haven't kept them from exporting that gas. They haven't kept them from connecting it to the pipelines or even profiting from that gas. So he absolutely failed, but Barisma didn't fail. His son didn't fail. They continued to make money. I mean, ironically, one of the very first things that Barisma asks of these guys when they're getting hired in the spring of 2014 is, number one, we need visas for our people because they're all criminals and wanted by Interpol and whatever. And number two, we want access to Mexico. Well, they get those visas for the guys who need them from the embassy in Kiev. And we know this because the Ukrainians are like, hey, you guys aren't going to believe this. Our people inside the embassy tell us the visas are going to be here by Tuesday, and you guys are going to get paid starting in June. So they haven't even been paid yet. And yet our State Department is already accommodating their executives with visas that they couldn't get before they hired Hunter. Wow. It defies any kind of reasonable read that you don't see the corruption.
Wow. So what is there any information you can share with viewers if they want more information or look at this more directly? Is there a place we could direct them to get more information on this?
Well, I was banned by Twitter. This is a kind of ironic story. On the first day, they told me there was information that I was going to self-harm, potentially commit suicide, and that I should know that people love me. And then the next day, they told me that they were suspending my account because of a number of posts in which I quote the Washington Post, "Democracy dies in darkness," while putting up documents from the hard drive. And then they finally decide that I'm a danger to the Twitter environment. I guess they've given up on the fact that I'm a danger to myself. And they banned me. So I'm not on Twitter anymore. I recently moved over to something called gab.com. I can be found there under Jack Maxey, #1, MAXEY 1. I've been posting various pages from it. But the real thing then, the real push that I'm working on right now is we're making multiple mirrored copies of this hard drive, hopefully as this thing moves on, hundreds of copies, and we're going to start getting them to legislators around the country very shortly. I would say by next weekend, these things are going to be dropping in people's boxes, and dozens are going to be delivered directly. So I don't think there's going to be any possible way for the media or anyone else to cover this up. And what bothers me is the media has had a lot of this for a long time, and they have failed the American people in the same way that our intelligence services failed the American people. The Fourth Estate did not do their job. They did not fairly report. In the recording where Hunter talks about his spy chief of China friend, he talks about the fact that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times are calling his father, calling Eric Schwerin, who's the licensee for the broker dealer, calling Devin Archer. Hunter's been listed as a witness, et cetera, et cetera. Why? How come those reporters never reported on any of that? So are they protecting Joe Biden too? Or are they somehow protecting this criminal activity? I think the people who really should be most angry are the supporters of those other Democratic candidates. How could this primary have been allowed to occur when the intelligence community knew all this? And I'm talking about Comey, all of them, Christopher Wray. There's nobody who should be blameless here. Or if they're blameless, explain to us how you didn't know and point the finger at the people who should have told you, because this needs to be cleaned up. I mean, the safety of our country, the future of Americans who are unborn depend on this being cleaned up, in my opinion.
And as you know, we've talked about many times here, the advice of Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano that comes from his conference that he gave at the Catholic Identity Conference. He gave us a real simple 3-point plan for how to deal with the deep, what he calls the deep church and the deep state, the kind of challenges and dangers within the church and within our civil life. And the first step of that is to be aware. You need to be aware of what's going on, aware of the facts, aware of the truth. Then 2, denounce the corruption, and then 3, pray. And there's, again, real simple things that we can all do, right? Some of us are not in the FBI or the CIA, so we can't actually do some of these things, but we can become aware, we can denounce what needs to be denounced, and we can pray that our Lord and Our Lady of Fatima save us from these things. So we appreciate all the work you're doing, and tremendous amount of work to help people with that first point, because the way to become informed is you have to get information out. And if there are forces, the media and others, that are trying to hide facts, it falls on patriotic citizens like yourself to help get the truth and the facts out. So we commend you for your work. Again, now you've heard, no, don't look on Twitter, look on Gab, and you can find Mr. Maxey's communications there. And hopefully, thanks to your work, someday soon, we'll be seeing this information more widely just reported and distributed, so that, as you say, we can pick up the pieces and move on. So thank you for all you've done and continue to do. And thank you for taking a break from your work to spend some time explaining this to our viewers.
And thank you. And also for your viewers, your Catholic viewers, one thing that's been a beautiful thing that's come out of this is just the renewed strength that I have in my faith, and the great number of Catholic faithful and patriots who reached out to me and told me that they're praying for me. I cannot thank them enough.
Well, that's great. Any of our viewers, if you want to thank Mr. Maxey for the work he's done, say a prayer, offer a prayer for him, after you see this program. And then if you've enjoyed this content, this free content, please remember to help us by forwarding it, spreading it, sharing it with people you know, and then also consider a subscription to our monthly newspaper, Catholic Family News. You can subscribe either in electronic form, where you just read it on a tablet, laptop, phone, or you can have electronic access plus a paper copy delivered to your home. Visit CatholicFamilyNews.com for subscription options. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you, and enjoy the fruits. We hope all of you enjoy the fruits of these last 2 weeks of Lent.